The community music center was always a busy place in the mornings. People came in and out carrying folders, small instruments, or cups of tea as they hurried toward their classes. In the middle of all this movement, a quiet woman walked in, almost unnoticed. She carried a small bag on her shoulder and wore a simple smile as she approached the main desk. She had come early because she wanted to help set up for the student showcase that was planned for the weekend. She never liked being late, and she especially never liked causing trouble for anyone. When she entered the hall, some of the teachers nodded politely at her, but no one paid much attention. They assumed she was one of the volunteers who would help arrange chairs or organize sheets of music. She didn't mind that they didn't ask many questions. She preferred silence and simple tasks. She was comfortable letting others take the lead. All she wanted was to be useful. While she walked around checking if the tables were clean, the teachers gathered near the front of the room. They were discussing the biggest problem of the day. A difficult piano piece needed to be rehearsed for the final event of the showcase. The student who was supposed to play it had caught a fever and could not come for practice. Another student who had tried the piece earlier had struggled, so much that the teachers had decided not to push them anymore. The teachers were worried. This piece was supposed to be the highlight of the event. It was meant to show the growth of the students and the effort they had put into mastering classical music. Without someone to rehearse it, they feared the final performance would feel incomplete. One teacher rubbed his forehead with frustration. Another checked the schedule again, hoping a miracle might appear. But nothing changed. The humble woman moved quietly along the wall, stacking some loose papers into neat piles. She could hear their worried voices, but she didn't look at them. She didn't want to seem as though she was listening to a conversation that wasn't meant for her. A teacher sighed and said, "I just need someone to play through it once. Even if it's not perfect, just so we have a feel for the timing and cues." Another teacher laughed softly. "Maybe one of the helpers can sit at the piano. Anyone can press the keys at least." The others smiled at the joke, not realizing the quiet woman had paused for a second. She didn't react, though. She had heard comments like that before. People often assumed she didn't know much. She had grown used to being mistaken for someone who only did small tasks. Still, she kept moving. She wiped dust off the piano bench and made sure the lid was closed properly. She had learned long ago that staying silent kept things peaceful. She did not want to attract questions or attention. The piano stood in the center of the room like a sleeping giant. Many people respected it, but few approached it carelessly. She touched the bench lightly before walking away. The teachers continued their conversation, still stuck on the same problem. They didn't want to remove the piece from the program. It was too important. But they also didn't want to force a student to perform something that might leave them embarrassed. After several minutes of discussion, one teacher noticed the woman fixing the chairs at the back of the hall. He called out to her politely, "Excuse me, can you come here for a moment?" She walked over slowly, unsure of what they needed. Her hands were still slightly dusty from moving the chairs. She wiped them on her shirt without thinking. The teacher gave her a hopeful smile. "We're in a bit of trouble. We need someone to play a short piece for a quick rehearsal. Nothing serious. Just to help us set the timing. Would you mind stepping in?" Her eyes widened a little. She shook her head softly. "Oh, I don't think I'm the right person for that. I'm only here to help with the event setup." Teachers didn't understand her hesitation. One thought she was simply shy. Another assumed she was afraid of making mistakes in front of people. "It's okay if it's not perfect," one of them assured her kindly. "We just need someone to touch the keys so we can count the measures. It won't take long." She stepped back slightly. She didn't want to disappoint them, but she also didn't want to reveal anything about herself. She lowered her voice and said, "I really haven't played in a long time." The teachers misread her words again. They exchanged soft smiles and nodded encouragingly. "Just try it once," one said gently. "We promise we won't judge," as another added. "Don't worry about playing well. Just help us get through the notes." The room felt warm and heavy around her. She wasn't used to being asked to play anymore. Years had passed since she last sat at a piano with purpose. She had spent so much time avoiding music that she'd never imagined she would be pushed toward it again. But the teachers were waiting. They seemed sincere and desperate for help. She didn't want to keep saying no and make them think she was refusing out of pride. After a few seconds of silence, she nodded slowly. "All right, I can try, but I really don't know how it will sound." The teachers didn't mind. They clapped their hands together in relief. One of them rushed to the piano and opened the lid. Another set the sheet music on the stand. They cleared the bench area like they were preparing a stage for a special performance. Even though they didn't expect much, the woman approached the piano with calm steps. Her heart wasn't racing, but it wasn't steady either. She felt a familiar heaviness, one she hadn't felt in years. She remembered the countless hours she had spent with this instrument in the past, the hours she had hidden from everyone. When she reached the bench, she sat down quietly. She placed her hands in her lap and took a slow breath. The room felt strangely quiet. Even the teachers stopped talking and watched her with gentle curiosity. She lifted her hands and rested them on the keys. Her fingers trembled for a moment, not from fear, but from memory. The keys felt the same as they always had, cool, smooth, and waiting. The teachers leaned in slightly, thinking she would start hesitantly, maybe pressing one note at a time. They expected a shaky attempt, maybe even mistakes. They were ready to comfort her if she stumbled. She looked at the sheet music only once. The notes were familiar, like an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. She didn't need to study it. She didn't need to prepare. Then, without any warning or pause, she began to play. The sound that came from the piano was nothing like what the teachers expected. The first notes were clear and confident. Her hands moved with certainty, finding each key as though they had never forgotten their place. She didn't hesitate. She didn't slow down. She simply played. The teachers froze where they stood. Their eyes widened. Their mouths parted in disbelief. They had never seen her before. They had never heard her speak about music. But now they were watching something they could not explain. She played the difficult piece as if it were simple. The rhythm flowed naturally. The melody rose and fell with emotion. She didn't rush, and she didn't struggle. She played with skill that only came from years of deep training. The room seemed to shrink around her as the sound filled every corner. Dust in the air shimmered in the light, and the teachers stood completely silent, almost afraid to move. When the final note faded, she lifted her hands slowly from the keys. She kept her eyes down, unsure of how everyone would react, but the room stayed quiet. Too quiet. She turned her head slightly, wondering if she had done something wrong instead. She found the teachers staring at her with a mixture of shock, wonder, and confusion. They looked as though they had just witnessed something impossible. She lowered her gaze again, waiting for them to speak. Not knowing what they would say or what questions would follow, the room stayed silent for several long seconds. And the woman could feel every bit of that silence resting on her shoulders. She did not know whether she had made things better or worse. She had only wanted to help and then quietly step back into the background again. But the way the teacher stared at her made it clear that slipping back into the background would no longer be easy. One teacher finally cleared his throat. It was a soft sound, but in the silence, it felt loud. He stepped forward, his eyes still fixed on her hands as if they were holding secret answers he had never seen before. That was... He began, but the words did not come. He blinked, shook his head a little, and tried again. "How long did you say it has been since you played?" She lowered her gaze. "A long time." Another teacher moved closer. She wasn't someone who usually got emotional easily, but her eyes were bright with amazement. "You played that piece like you've been practicing it every day for years. That wasn't just good. That was..." She stopped herself, trying not to overwhelm the woman. "You must have performed before." The woman shifted slightly on the bench. She didn't want to explain too much, and she also didn't want to seem rude. "I used to learn when I was younger, but I haven't played in many years." The teachers exchanged looks. They all understood that she wasn't telling them everything, but none of them wanted to pressure her. They could see she was uncomfortable with the attention. One teacher finally spoke gently. "Thank you for helping us. Really, you didn't have to." She nodded and slowly stood from the bench, trying to slip away quietly, but the teachers weren't done. They weren't pushy, but they were curious genuinely curious. "Would you mind playing it again?" one asked softly. "Just once more? We want to record the timing so our students can practice with it later. You don't need to do anything extra. Just play it the way you did before." It wasn't a harsh request. Their voices were calm, respectful, even hopeful. She could tell they weren't trying to expose her or make her explain her past. They simply wanted help. Still, she hesitated. Playing once had been difficult enough. Not because the piece was hard, but because she had spent so many years keeping herself away from music that touching. The piano again opened memories she didn't always want to revisit, but those teachers had been kind to her since the day she'd volunteered. They trusted her even though they barely knew her. She didn't like the feeling of disappointing people, so after a small pause she nodded. "I can play it one more time." The teachers took a step back, giving her space as they prepared a small camera on a stand. She waited quietly until they signaled they were ready. Then she placed her hands on the keys again. Her fingers didn't shake this time. The nervousness she had felt earlier had faded into something else, something calm, almost peaceful. When she played the second time, the sound felt even smoother. The notes flowed effortlessly, and the melody wrapped around the room like a warm blanket. She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't try to show off. She simply played the way she remembered learning Inist, steady and full of quiet emotion. When the piece ended, she lifted her hands gently again and stood from the bench, wanting to step away before anyone reacted too strongly. But the teachers approached her slowly, not wanting to overwhelm her. "You helped us more than you know," one teacher said. "We've been stressing about this piece for days, but with this recording, our students will have something clear to follow." Another added, "You saved the program today. Truly." She shook her head. "I didn't save anything. I just helped a little." They didn't let her dismiss herself so easily. "Helping a little is sometimes exactly what saves everything," a teacher said softly. She didn't respond to that. She only offered a small smile before stepping back toward the side of the room where she had been working earlier. She hoped things would return to normal, that she could go back to cleaning and sorting without anyone looking at her too closely. But normal had already shifted as she rearranged a stack of papers. She could feel the teacher's eyes drift toward her again and again. Not in a harsh way, not in a suspicious way. More like they were trying to understand who she really was. After a few minutes, the teachers gathered near the piano. They weren't whispering, but they were speaking softly. She heard bits and pieces of their conversation. "Did you hear how she controlled the dynamics? That wasn't beginner level. That was concert level. Why would someone with talent like that not mention it?" She tried to ignore the words, but it was difficult. She kept her eyes on the table, pretending not to hear. She had grown used to people underestimating her, but she had never expected people to react so strongly when they discovered what she could do. A few minutes later, one of the teachers approached her again. He looked careful, as though he didn't want to disturb her. "I hope we didn't make you uncomfortable," he said. "We truly appreciate what you did. If you ever want to play here again, or even just sit at the piano when no one's around, you're welcome to." She looked up finally, surprised by the kind offer. "Thank you, but I'm only here to help with the event. I don't want to take space from anyone else." He shook his head. "No one here would feel that way. You're welcome anytime." She nodded politely, but didn't answer further. The teacher didn't push. He thanked her again before returning to the others. The rest of the day moved quietly. She continued her tasks, arranging chairs, checking the stage area, organizing music sheets, and the teachers continued preparing lessons and discussing the event. Every now and then, one of them would glance at her with a thoughtful expression, but none of them bothered her again. Later in the afternoon, when the sunlight softened and the center was less busy, she found herself standing near the piano again. She hadn't meant to walk toward it. Her feet had simply taken her there. She looked at the keys from a distance, remembering how they felt under her fingers. She traced the edge of the bench with her hand. It felt familiar, almost like touching an old memory she thought she'd let go of. She wondered if she had been foolish to play earlier. She had worked so hard to build a quiet life, one where no one expected anything extraordinary from her. Now, She had done something that would make people notice her again. But the teachers had been kind. They weren't judging her. They weren't prying. They were simply surprised and grateful. She walked back to her bag, ready to leave for the day, but a gentle voice called to her from behind. "Before you go," a teacher said softly, "thank you again. You helped us more than you think." She nodded once more, offering a small smile before stepping out of the hall. The evening air felt cooler. The sky glowed with warm colors as she walked home. She carried no pride, no excitement only, a quiet confusion. She had left a part of herself buried for so long, and now it had resurfaced because a few teachers had simply needed help as she walked. She wondered if that part of herself would stay hidden again, or if this small moment at the music center would change more than she expected. The next morning, the music center was already full of movement when the woman arrived. She came early again, carrying the same small bag and wearing the same calm expression. She hoped that the day would go back to normal, that the teachers would be too busy to think about what had happened the day before. She wanted to slip back into her quiet routine, setting up chairs, helping with small tasks, and staying invisible in the crowd. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt a different kind of attention around her. It was gentle, not overwhelming, but it was there. Some teachers gave her warm smiles. One even nodded at her as though they shared a secret. She didn't know how to react, so she simply returned their smiles, politely, and kept walking. She headed to the main hall where most of the preparation was happening. Several teachers stood near the piano, discussing the schedule for the day. When they noticed her, their expressions softened. "Good morning," one of them said warmly. She nodded. "Good morning. I didn't bring up yesterday," and she was relieved. She didn't want to talk about it. She didn't want anyone to think she felt proud of what she had done. To her, she had only helped a little, nothing more. She placed her bag on a chair and started arranging the chairs in rows again. But as she worked, she heard soft whispers behind her. "That's her," the young assistant murmured quietly. "I heard she played the piece perfectly on the first try. Is she a teacher? I don't know. She just volunteers here." The woman kept her eyes down, pretending she hadn't heard anything. Attention always made her uncomfortable, and she didn't know how to respond when people talked about her. She just wanted the day to move smoothly. A little later, one of the teachers approached her. He was holding a notebook and looked slightly unsure about something. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She paused and turned to him. "Of course." He hesitated for a moment before saying, "We have some students coming in today to practice that same piece. They're still nervous about it. Would you be willing to stay in the hall while they practice? Your presence might help them feel safe." She blinked, surprised. "Me, yes," he said gently. "You don't have to play. Just be here. They saw how calmly you played yesterday. It might comfort them." She didn't know whether she was the right person for that. She had never thought of herself as someone who could encourage others. Still, she didn't want to say no. She gave a small nod. "If it helps them, I can stay." The teacher smiled gratefully. "Thank you. It means a lot to them." Not long after, the students started arriving. Some carried sheet music, some carried small bags, and all of them looked a little nervous. They took their seats quietly while the teachers prepared for the practice session. When the students saw the woman sitting near the piano, their expressions changed slightly. They didn't look scared anymore, just curious. One student whispered to another, "That's the lady who played it yesterday." The woman heard the whisper, but pretended not to. She sat quietly, her hands folded, trying not to draw any attention. The first student stepped up to the piano. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the bench. The teachers watched him kindly, ready to help. The woman watched too, but she made sure not to stare too much. She didn't want him to feel pressured. He played the opening notes softly at first, then with more strength. He stumbled a little in the middle and stopped completely, sighing in frustration. One teacher placed a hand on his shoulder. "Take your time. There's no rush." The boy nodded but still looked nervous. The woman, without rising from her seat, spoke gently. "You're doing well. Don't force the notes. Let them come to you." The boy glanced at her, surprised she had spoken. Her voice was soft, but it carried a warmth that made him relax. He tried again, and this time he played with less tension. His shoulders dropped, and the sound became smoother. The teachers noticed the change and exchanged quiet smiles. When the boy finished, she offered a small nod. "You see, you can do it." He smiled shyly before returning to his seat. One after another, more students stepped up to try the piece. Each of them brought their own nervousness, their own struggles. And each time they faltered, the woman offered a calm word or a gentle reminder. "Don't rush. Relax your wrist. Listen to the melody, not just the notes." Her words were never loud, never demanding, but they carried weight. The students listened to her as though she understood the piano in a way few people did. After a while, one teacher came up to her quietly. "You have a gift," he said softly. She shook her head. "I'm only sharing what I learned long ago." He smiled. "Sometimes that's exactly what people need. Someone who understands." She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded. Later in the afternoon, a teacher suggested that she play the piece once more so the students could watch her hands more closely. She hesitated again, but the students looked at her with such hopeful eyes that she couldn't refuse. She sat at the piano, took a quiet breath, and began to play. This time, she didn't try to hide her emotions. She let herself feel the music, the softness, the strength, the small memories that drifted through each note. The students watched in silence. Some leaned forward. Some held their breath. The teachers didn't speak. They didn't even move. When she finished, the room remained still for a moment. Then one student whispered, "It's like the piano listens to you." She looked down, feeling her cheeks warm slightly. "The piano listens to everyone," she said. "You just have to speak to it gently." Students smiled, and the teachers did too. The rest of the day passed calmly. The students practiced with more confidence. The woman stayed with them, offering guidance when needed, but never pushing too hard. She didn't try to be a teacher. She simply shared what she knew in a quiet, natural way. But the teachers couldn't ignore the truth anymore. She wasn't just someone who knew how to play. She played like someone who understood music deeply. Someone who had lived with it, trained with it, breathed it for years. By late afternoon, when the students had left and the hall had grown quiet again, one teacher approached her carefully. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. She paused. "I suppose so," he spoke gently. "Were you trained professionally? You play like someone who has performed on real stages." She froze for a moment. The question touched a place she kept hidden, a place filled with old memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit. After a long pause, she answered softly, "I trained for many years when I was younger. It was a big part of my life. But things changed. Life took me in a different direction." The teacher nodded slowly, not pushing for more. "Thank you for sharing that. We won't ask for details. Just know, what you did today helped more than you know." She gave him a small, grateful nod as she walked home that evening. The light breeze brushed against her face, and the sound of distant traffic blended with the fading rhythm of the piece she had played earlier. She wondered why she had opened up even a little. She wasn't someone who shared her past easily, but today had been different. The students had trusted her. The teachers had treated her with respect. And somehow, playing the piano again had not felt like a burden. It had felt peaceful. Still, she didn't want to think too far ahead. She didn't want to assume anything would change. Yet somewhere inside her, quiet thought whispered, maybe the music she had buried long ago wasn't gone. Maybe it was simply waiting for moments like this to return. She walked home with steady steps, not knowing that the next days would bring even more surprises. Ones that would slowly pull her out of her quiet life and back into a world she thought she had left behind. The next morning arrived with a quiet kind of tension that settled over the school halls like a thin fog. The woman walked through the entrance carrying her small bag. It's the same one she used every day, but today her hands held it a little tighter. She felt the weight of what happened the day before, especially the moment she played the piano when everyone else failed. She didn't want attention, but she already felt eyes turning in her direction. Soft whispers floating behind her like a light breeze. Still, she kept her steps steady. She had learned long ago that when the world wanted to talk, it would talk, and there was nothing a person could do except move forward. When she reached the staff room, she paused before opening the door. She took a small breath and stepped inside. Most of the teachers were already gathered around a table with papers and teacups scattered in front of them. As soon as she entered, the room went quiet for a moment. Then awkward chatter resumed. A few teachers greeted her politely, though their expressions looked different today. Some smiled a bit too much, others avoided eye contact. She could sense their confusion, their curiosity, and even a hint of embarrassment. Yesterday, they pushed her in front of the piano, thinking she would struggle. Instead, she had played the piece so well that even the strict music instructor had been caught speechless. She placed her bag on a chair and tried to join the group as naturally as possible. Inside, her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. One of the older teachers finally turned toward her. "We were just talking about yesterday," he said gently. "Your playing was?" Unexpected. Impressive, actually. She forced a small smile, hoping it wouldn't look uncomfortable. "I just played what I remembered," she said softly. A younger teacher leaned forward. "Remembered? That piece was extremely difficult. Most trained players can't perform it so cleanly." She didn't know how to answer without revealing too much. She never planned to share her past. Her life had taught her to keep things close, especially the things that once brought her joy, but also pain. Before she could respond, the principal entered the staff room. His expression was calm, but his eyes were focused directly on her. "May I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. A few teachers exchanged glances, some curious, others nervous. She nodded and followed the principal out of the room. He led her down the hallway to his office. The door closed with a soft click, and the room fell into silence. He motioned for her to sit. "Yesterday was quite a surprise," he began. "I've never seen anyone play that way in this building. Not even our music staff." She lowered her gaze. "I didn't mean to draw attention. I only played because they insisted." "I know," he said. "And I also know you rarely speak up for yourself. That's one reason I called you here. I want to understand something. How long have you been playing the piano?" She hesitated. Her fingers touched lightly against each other. "Since I was very young," she said finally. "It used to be a big part of my life." The principal nodded slowly. "Used to be," he studied her face with gentle curiosity. "But no longer?" She looked toward the window as if searching the sky for the right words. "Life changed," she said simply. "I had responsibilities. I stopped playing for many years." "Yet your skill never left you," he said. She didn't reply. She didn't want to talk about all the nights she used to play until her hands ached, or how music had once been her escape when everything around her felt uncertain. She didn't want to admit that walking away from the piano wasn't a choice as much as a necessity. The principal folded his hands on the desk. "I have a request," he said. "A small one, but important." She didn't respond, only waited. "We have a school event coming in a few weeks," he said. "A ceremony where students and teachers come together. It's a tradition. But something unexpected happened this year. Our music team doesn't have anyone ready to perform the main piece. They've been trying to train a few students, but it's not going well." She already knew where this was going, and a quiet knot formed in her stomach. "I would like you to perform," he said softly. The words hung in the air like a soft echo. Her hands instinctively tightened in her lap. "Sir, I'm not. I didn't plan to perform again. It's been too long." "But you did yesterday," he reminded her gently. "And you did it with grace. You brought something special into that room. I saw the way people reacted. I saw the way you seemed to lose yourself in the music for a moment." She didn't like being seen, especially like that. Music had always been a private part of her life, something she didn't offer to the world lightly. "I'm asking," he continued, "not for the school, not for the audience, but for you. Sometimes people run from the very things that once brought them strength. Maybe this is a chance to return to something that belongs to you." His words were kind, but they felt heavy. She shook her head slightly. "I don't know if I can." "Think about it," he said. "I won't pressure you, but I hope you'll consider it." She nodded, because it felt like the only polite thing to do. Then she left the office quietly. Instead of going back to the staff room, she walked outside for a few minutes. The morning sun warmed her face, but her thoughts were tangled. She didn't want to be in the spotlight. She didn't want rumors or questions. She wanted a peaceful, simple life. But deep inside, a small part of her wand she had tried to silence for years remembered. What it felt like to sit at the piano and touch the keys as if speaking a language no one else could hear. That part of her wasn't quiet today. Later that afternoon, as she tried to focus on her tasks, she noticed the music instructor lingering near the door. He looked unsure of himself, something she had never seen from him before. "Do you have a moment?" he asked. She nodded, though she wasn't sure what he wanted. "I owe you an apology," he said plainly. "Yesterday, I assumed you wouldn't be able to play. I even encouraged the others to push you into it, thinking it would be a harmless joke. I didn't expect what happened." His honesty surprised her. She had prepared herself for awkwardness or excuses, but not sincerity. "It's fine," she said softly. "It's not," he insisted, "and there's something else. I haven't stopped thinking about the way you played. I've taught music for years, and I've listened to many people try that piece. But the emotion you put into it, that's not something that comes from practice alone. That comes from living with music." She shifted awkwardly. Compliments made her uncomfortable. Then he took a step closer, lowering his voice. "If you decide to perform at the ceremony, I would like to help you prepare. Only if you want, no pressure." The offer was kind, and it softened something inside her. But she still wasn't ready to give him an answer. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded. "That's all I ask." As the day neared its end, she walked home slowly, letting the cool air brush against her face. Her mind ran through the events of the day, replaying conversations she didn't expect to have. The truth was simple, though hard to admit. A part of her missed the piano. Not the audience, not the attention, not the pressure, just the music itself. When she reached her home, she placed her bag down and sat quietly for a long time. She didn't play music there anymore. She didn't even own a piano now. Her life had moved in another direction. But the memory of her fingers touching those keys yesterday lingered like a faint melody she couldn't ignore. She didn't know yet if she would say yes to performing at the ceremony. But the possibility was starting to grow in her mind, slow and gentle, like a seed waking after years of silence. And for the first time in a long while, she wondered what it would feel like to let music back into her life again. The days that followed moved slowly. Yet each one carried a small shift, like a quiet wind changing direction without anyone noticing at first. The woman continued her work as usual, helping where she was needed, staying in the background, doing her duties with steady calm. But inside her, something had begun to stir, something she had tried to keep silent for many years. The principal's request to perform at the school, the ceremony stayed in her mind. She tried to push it aside, but it returned every time she walked past the hall where the piano was kept. Even the faint smell of polished wood made memories rise inside her memories. She wasn't sure she was ready to face again. One afternoon, as she arranged books in a quiet corner of the building, she heard soft notes coming from the music room. They weren't steady or confident. Instead, they stumbled through the melody like someone learning to walk again. Curiosity pulled her toward the sound. She stopped at the doorway and found one of the students sitting at the piano, his shoulders tense, his fingers pressing the keys with hesitation. The music teacher stood beside him, trying to guide him, but the boy looked frustrated. She didn't speak, only observed silently. The student noticed her and quickly moved his hands away from the keys. "I'm sorry," he said nervously. "I know I'm not good at this piece. I've been trying for days." She gave him a calm smile. "It takes time," she said softly. "It's a difficult piece." The music teacher glanced at her. His expression shifted, as if he suddenly had an idea he wasn't sure he should say out loud. "Could you maybe show him the first section?" he asked gently. She hesitated. The room felt too quiet, too expectant, but the student's hopeful eyes made it hard to walk away. So she stepped forward. She sat on the bench, not in the center. She left space for the student to sit beside her, so he could see her hands closely. When he joined her, she placed her fingers lightly on the keys, not pressing them yet. Just resting like greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Then she began to play. The notes came softly, slowly, like the first words of a story. Her fingers moved with ease, guiding the melody one breath at a time. The student watched with full attention, leaning closer so he wouldn't miss anything. When she finished the short section, she turned to him and said, "Try it gently. Don't rush it. Let your fingers feel where they need to go." The boy nodded. He placed his hands carefully and began playing again. This time, the notes flowed a little smoother, a little steadier. The music teacher smiled softly. "He's doing better already," he said. She only nodded. She didn't feel proud, just warm inside, like she had shared something small but meaningful. After a few more minutes, she stood to go back to her tasks. But before she left, the student looked up at her. "Thank you," he said. "You made it look easy." She shook her head with a gentle smile. "It's only easy when you stop being afraid of the notes." Those words stayed with her long after she left the room. That evening, as she walked home under a sky slowly turning orange, she thought about what she told the boy. Stop being afraid of the notes. It was advice she needed to hear herself. Maybe she wasn't really afraid of the performance. Maybe she was afraid of what returning to music would make her feel: old memories, old dreams, things she thought she had put away forever. When she reached home, she sat by the window with a warm cup of tea. Outside, children played in the street, their laughter rising like little sparks of joy. She watched them for a while, letting their energy lighten her thoughts. Then, without planning it, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I could try. Just try." The next morning, she returned to the school earlier than usual. The halls were almost empty, except for the soft hum of cleaning machines in the distance. Her feet guided her almost unconsciously toward the music room. The piano sat in the corner, quiet and waiting. She looked around. No one was there. She walked toward the bench and sat down. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the fallboard. Revealing the clean keys beneath, she placed her hands down gently. The first note she pressed was soft, almost shy. Then came another, then another. Soon a melody flowed out when she used to play long ago, like when she still believed music would carry her through life. The room felt warmer as she played. She could feel her body relaxing, her breathing settling into rhythm with the music. Every note brought back pieces of herself she had forgotten: joy, sadness, strength, longing. It was all there, woven into the sound. She didn't know how long she played, but when she stopped, she felt lighter as she closed the piano and stood to leave. She didn't notice the principal watching from the doorway. He hadn't meant to interrupt. He had simply walked by and heard the music. He stayed silent, letting her finish. When she turned and saw him, she froze for a moment, unsure how much he had heard. He gave her a gentle smile. "You still have it," he said softly. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "I was just remembering something." "Sometimes remembering is exactly what we need," he replied. For a moment, he watched her with understanding. Then he spoke again. "Have you decided about the ceremony?" She looked at the piano once more. The room felt different, now less intimidating, more familiar. "I'm not sure," she said honestly, "but I'm thinking about it." "That's enough for now," he said kindly. He didn't push her, and she appreciated that. Throughout the week, she continued practicing in small moments: early mornings, short breaks, times when the school was quiet and no one noticed her slipping into the music room. The more she practiced, the more her confidence returned. Though she never admitted it to anyone, some teachers began to notice her faint humming during the day, especially when she cleaned or organized materials. Others saw a small change in her posture, like she carried a little more ease in her steps. But the biggest change was inside her. One afternoon, the student she had helped approached her shyly. "Will you be performing at the ceremony?" he asked. She paused. "I haven't decided yet." "I hope you do," he said. "You play in a way that makes people want to listen. It makes learning feel less scary." His words touched her more deeply than he knew. Later that day, she found herself once again sitting at the piano. She began practicing the piece the principal had mentioned, the one intended for the ceremony. It was a long, complex piece that climbed and fell like a mountain range. Each section required focus and emotion as she played. She felt something returning, a strength she thought she had lost. But there was also fear. Not fear of the notes or the performance, but fear of letting herself hope again. Music had once been her dream. Life had forced her to step away. What if returning to it made her feel the loss all over again? Still, her fingers continued to move. The music teacher passed by the door and paused, listening. He didn't enter. He simply stood there with quiet respect, letting her work through the piece on her own. After she finished, she sat still for a moment, breathing deeply. Then she whispered to the empty room, "I don't know if I can do this, but maybe I can try." That night, she walked home with a different kind of calm inside her. She wasn't certain of her answer yet, but she wasn't running from it anymore. The seed that had been planted days before had begun to grow, not loudly. Not suddenly, but gently, the way new beginnings often do. And somewhere inside her, whether she admitted it or not, she already knew that a part of her wanted to return to the world she once loved. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a calm sky, the kind that made the air feel gentle and full of promise. The woman woke earlier than usual, even though she barely slept. Her mind had been restless the night before, filled with thoughts that moved like quiet waves of memories of the past, fears about the present, and a small, warm feeling of hope that she tried not to notice too much.